Okay, good morning, friends. So, we are going to start with the new topic cultural geography. इस ये टॉपिक जो है सिलेबस में बिखरा हुआ है एंड आई हैव डिसाइडेड टू टीच इट separately because if you look into the development of geography as a subject, what we find is that there is a new branch of cultural geography which has emerged. This, if you talk about cultural geography, it is more of a new branch because it has essentially grown particularly since 1980s, and obviously it is not very much reflected in our syllabus, this new edition, but whatever, we have to study it. So if we look into some of the topics which are there of cultural geography which are there in paper 1, cultural geography topics are mentioned in the topic of perspectives in human geography. Like, for example, one topic is languages, another topic, if you talk about, is religion, another topic is secularization and the cultural regions of the world. So, these, if you talk about 4 topics, if you talk about, are mentioned in the syllabus. Some of these are very, if you talk about, in a way, inclusive topics like languages and religion. So, it is not very clear what UPSC is going to ask when it is mentioning languages or religion. One thing in religion is mentioned, that they can ask question on secularization. Secularization is a phenomena whereby the, if you talk about, authority of religion declines in the society. So secularization, definitely they have directly mentioned one, that is one aspect of religion. But what are the other areas? Because there are number of, if you talk about, themes within language and religion which is mentioned in the syllabus. So to decode it, we'll look into how we'll be decoding it. So that is one area where the topic is mentioned, cultural geography. Then cultural geography is also mentioned in paper 2, and here cultural geography is mentioned as topics like historical perspective of Indian society, racial, linguistic and ethnic diversities, religious minorities, major tribes and tribal areas and their problems, and cultural regions. In paper 2, more number of topics related with cultural geography are mentioned. In fact, here there is the population geography topic is here in fact mentioned as cultural setting. Okay. So that is basically rest, as we have seen that rest of the topics are more related with demography or population. These topics, if you talk about, are more related with the culture of India or cultural setting. So what we are going to do today, number of things we'll be talking about. We will discuss in general about number of things. We will discuss some of the important concepts. Like, for example, we'll talk about first the concept of culture. We'll discuss about the concept of culture, and we will look into, in general, the case of cultural geography, and then we will look into some important concepts, some important, you can say, topics which can be directly even asked in the examination, and one of these in fact has been asked directly, other has been asked more indirectly. So we will see, we have studied about the perspectives in human geography, and we have seen that how geography development has overall taken place. Few things we left out purposefully. I didn't talk about one important event which is referred to as the cultural turn. Okay, so we will look into what was essentially the case of cultural turn in geographical studies. And we will see that this cultural turn essentially was a movement which started in 1980s. And since then, geographers have been very much interested in study of cultures. And we have tried to study not only culture per se, culture we have been studying, more wider implications of culture were studied since the cultural turn. Like, for example, how culture intervenes in production of number of phenomena like economic phenomena, like political phenomena, how other factors are influencing. Before, we had just studied culture with respect to how environment and culture are interrelated. Okay. Later on, there was study of more wider implications of the culture. In fact, since cultural turn, it was also recognized that there is variety of cultures which are found on the surface of the earth. So, in fact, we will see that since then, geographers have started to use the term rather than the term culture, the term cultures has become a more commonly used term. Okay, so we will talk about the cultural turn. We will talk about the phenomena of cultural diffusion. In fact, the theory of cultural diffusion we will be talking about. Okay, this is some basic, if you talk about premises of the phenomena of culture that we have to, or the concepts related with culture, we need to discuss. Once we have discussed this, what we will do, we will move on and then we will start talking about the main topics of the syllabus and we will discuss. First, I will be starting with, if you talk about some topics of paper 2. Like, for example, I will talk about the racial diversity in case of India and we will talk about the historical perspectives. These will be the first two topics that we will be discussing. Race, if you talk about, has already been discussed in your classes from the world point of view, but on general, I will just explain what is race from the world point of view. So, we will be talking about the racial diversity. Then we will look into the historical perspectives in Indian society or of Indian society. Once we are done with this, then we will move on to some of the important topics. We will look into the topic of religion. So we will look into a number of things, like, for example, within religion, we will look into from both world and India point of view. In Indian geography, one topic is mentioned related with religion. It is religious minorities. It is religious minorities is mentioned in the syllabus. From world point of view, we will be studying about number of things. We will talk about the major religions. We'll talk about their origin and distribution. Then we will also talk about number of other things which we have to essentially study from the perspective of religion. Like, for example, influence of religion on society. Influence of religion on society. Other topics which have been important, like, for example, religious fundamentalism, other topics like one topic is that of religious places. All of these, if you talk about, are the dominant themes within the study of religion. ठीक है, we'll see influence of religion में कैसे religion, if you talk about, is almost everywhere, and our habits, our culture, everything is defined by religion. So much so that we will see that the cultural regions of the world can be identified on the basis of religion. Okay, so these are some of the topics, and definitely when we are talking about the influence of religion, related with influence of religion, one topic separately mentioned in the syllabus is secularization. Secularization. ठीक है, so that is the topic of religion. Then there is mention of the topic of language, and if you talk about the language, we will look into again this from the world and the India point of view. So we'll look into number of things. For example, we'll look into the concept of language families and their distribution. We will look into role of language. So how language essentially determines various forms of culture. In a way, language, if you talk about, we will see it is the medium of culture. Okay, it is medium through which the culture is essentially expressed. So various cultural traits can be found by the study of the languages. So we will look into what is the role of language in influencing, for example, the culture, in influencing several other things like, for example, the politics, how it essentially influences. For example, in India, you can understand there is the concept of linguistic states, and this is a phenomena which is not only found in India. For example, if you imagine in your mind the map of Europe, can we say the countries which are present, they are also can be called as linguistic regions present in Europe? So how language essentially plays a very important role in the politics, both at the global as well as the local national levels. So the role of language in other phenomena like, for example, development. Okay, for example, think about this. Can we say that if you look into the relationship between language and development, we find that there exists a kind of inverse relationship between linguistic diversity and the level of development? Yes or no? अगर हम देखें तो अफ्रीका में सबसे ज़्यादा लिंग्विस्टिक डाइवर्सिटी है. Can we say that there is less development found there? On the other hand, if you look into countries of Anglo-America, in Anglo-America there is one of the areas where there is least linguistic diversity in terms of the major language which is used. So again, you will be finding that it is one of the world's most developed area. Okay, same thing you will be finding in case of India. For example, India में देखेंगे कि North East is one of the areas and the tribal belt of India which is having the highest linguistic diversity, and we will be finding that there the level of development is low. There are areas where there is more uniformity of language, there is more singular type of language has become the dominant language, whether you talk about the Punjabi region, whether you talk about the Marathi region. These are the areas where you will be finding that the levels of development are very high. Okay? So we will look into what role the language plays in determining various aspects of the society. So role of language is one of the very, very important dominant theme. ठीक है, both from the world and India point of view. Then if you talk about other important concept which has emerged today, it is the concept of language endangerment. So today we find that there is very fast loss of languages taking place. So several languages are essentially in danger. They are already been lost, both if you look at the world level as well as at the India level. So what are essentially the factors which are leading to such loss of languages, and what are the consequences of that? For example, you just think about this, that there was, you might be aware that 2004 there was a tsunami, Indian Ocean tsunami, and it led to devastating impacts on the nearby regions, including India. However, it was found that Andaman and Nicobar Island was one of the islands which was very much worst affected. It was, however, found that many of the tribes, the native tribes of Andaman, they were able to sense the danger, and before even the tsunami actually arrived, they could sense this danger and they migrated or they shifted to higher elevations. This very clearly shows that they have certain kind of traditional ecological knowledge. And if you talk about this traditional ecological knowledge, if suppose they are lost and their language is lost, can we say that ultimately we will lose this traditional ecological knowledge which would have developed over centuries? Okay. So again, there is a very important role which language plays, and the language endangerment is essentially, it means that many of the knowledges which the world would have developed, people would have developed over centuries, okay, over entire human history, may be essentially lost. So these are the main themes that we have to essentially study from the perspective of language. Okay. Then another topic in the syllabus, this is with respect to paper 2 we will be talking about, and this is the case of ethnic diversity. बट ये जो एथनिक डाइवर्सिटी है, इसको हम एक्चुअली पढ़ेंगे किसके साथ? विल लुक इनटू व्हाट इज द कंसेप्ट ऑफ एथनिसिटी. Of ethnicity. ठीक है, and we will, because we would have already studied about the religion, we would have already studied about the language, etc., the race, we would ultimately understand why there is the reason. What are the reasons for so much ethnic diversity in India? What is exactly the ethnic diversity we will be studying in the other topic, and this is the topic of cultural regions. So as you can understand, we have to study the cultural regions from both the point of view, from the perspective of world and the perspective of India. ये दोनों के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से हमें कल्चरल रीजन्स पढ़ने. ठीक है. एंड वन मोर टॉपिक विच इज़ नॉट मेंशन्ड इन द सिलेबस, बट अगर पिछले साल के क्वेश्चंस को देखें, PYQs को देखें, तो दिस क्वेश्चन हैज़ बीन वेरी डोमिनेंटली आस्क्ड, एंड दिस क्वेश्चन इज द related with loss of cultures. ठीक है. So for example, in recent times you can understand there is phenomena of globalization, and with globalization there is lots of cultural change which is taking place. So there is an idea which has been expressed related with loss of culture, that many of the native cultures are essentially being lost as a consequence of this. So if you look into the PYQs, at least in the past 13 years, 2 times this question has been asked in one way or other related with the loss of cultures. Okay. So these are the topics which we will be discussing as a part of cultural geography. ठीक है. तो obviously तुम लोग समझ सकते हो कि ये cultural geography का जो topic है, ये एक अलग ही डोमेन है geography के अंदर, और we are going to cover it in a very comprehensive manner. ये कहीं और किसी और क्लासेस में नहीं पढ़ाया जाता है, जो यूपीएससी ज्योग्राफी की क्लासेस होती हैं, ठीक है, लेकिन हम इसको अच्छे से कवर करेंगे. सो इस पे एक लाइक तो बनता है. So all those who are watching on YouTube, please like the classes, recommend the classes, share the classes, so that we can grow our audience and reveal the true nature of geography. In fact, Amit was here few days back, so we were discussing about geography. He will also be he is also very much interested in the teaching field. तो अभी लोगों को आईएएस और पीसीएस बनने में बहुत ज़्यादा इंटरेस्ट नहीं रह गया है, whatever. But we were discussing about geography and geography optional. Like I have been doing in my 500 plus, his recommendation to me was that you should actually start geography with human geography. Foundation classes maybe, because in 500 plus I start geography with human geography always. So he believed that it is a better approach, because if you actually look into geography, more of geography is human geography. Almost if you look into 65-70% of geography is human geography. But जब हम physical geography से start करते हैं, तो students, if you talk about, become overburdened. Many of the topics, if you talk about, are technical in nature, like geomorphology, climatology. They are very technical. उनका रोल अगर हम एग्जामिनेशन में भी देखें तो काफ़ी कम है फ्रॉम व्हाट दीज टॉपिक्स आर एंड हाउ मच टाइम वी डिवोट, एंड स्टूडेंट्स आर ओवरबर्डन्ड. So comparatively, if you look into, human geography is much easier to grasp and it forms the main core of geography. So why not change the paradigm? And ये paradigm जो यूपीएससी की प्रिपरेशन में अभी तक चलता रहा है, वो फिजिकल ज्योग्राफी का paradigm, कि सब लोग आते हैं फिजिकल ज्योग्राफी से स्टार्ट करते हैं, क्योंकि एक्चुअली में टीचर्स को फिजिकल ज्योग्राफी ही आता है, ह्यूमन ज्योग्राफी आता ही नहीं. So it has become a trend. So he suggested me that why not you break this trend and start a new paradigm in the preparation of geography. So मैंने भी सोचा है कि अगला जो जून से जो बैच होगा, I will be starting actually with human geography and not with the physical geography topic. Okay, so let us start with our first idea of culture. तो सबसे पहला तो क्वेश्चन यही है कि व्हाट do you understand by the term culture? What do you understand by the term culture? Traditions that we follow. It is way of life, okay. In fact, we will see the most popular understanding of culture is that culture refers to way of life. ठीक है, it is actually, culture is what it is, sum total of the ways of living. Sum total of the ways of living. Okay, so this is one, if you talk about the most popular meaning of the term culture. However, one thing we must understand, that culture, if you talk about, is something which is very difficult to define. It is something of a very ambiguous term. because of certain you can say scholars, certain time periods in geography, if you talk about this, understanding of culture is most popular. Like for example, one of the very very influential personality in the development of human geography was Vidal de Lablache. And Vidal de Lablache talked about culture essentially as way of life. He used in fact a word, generative generative. ठीक है. And if you look into the idea of Vidal, we could very clearly see he was discussing about how there was a relationship which existed between the physical landscape and the culture which has developed. The same idea, if you look into, it was later reflected in United States by Carl Sawyer, where he developed the concept of cultural landscape. ठीक है. So that means a particular areas, you can understand that there is development of what, there is certain type of cultures which would develop. Obviously you can understand that this idea was if you talk about this idea that there is certain landscape which are giving rise to certain type of cultures, this idea is a more deterministic idea. It is full of environmental determinism. No doubt Sawyer tried to superimpose his possibilism also over this idea that sometimes the cultures can be superior and culture can ultimately create changes in the landscape as well. There can be emergence of cultural landscape. Okay, but still if you look into, there are number of other meanings of culture which has developed over a period of time. Like for example, if you talk about essentially the culture, can we say the term culture is used in variety of sense. Like for example, can we say culture has also been used in denoting some kind of superiority? Like for example, tell me, can we say that certain type of cultures are considered to be superior compared to the other cultures? So cultures has also, the term culture has also been used essentially as what? As a tool for variety of phenomena. Like for example, the same cultural meaning was used in the phenomena of colonization, where the colonial rulers considered their culture to be superior and ultimately they influenced how the cultures in the areas developed. Okay. In fact, we will see there is an idea which developed in 1980s that there is nothing as culture. Culture is essentially what? It is a tool to dominate. And cultures, if you talk about, they are ever changing. Okay, and they have changed throughout if you look into the history. So that is basically, that is one meaning of the term culture. From this another thing emerges about culture is that, think about, can we say, do we use sometimes words like cultured? So cultured here becomes what? Cultured here becomes a verb, it becomes a process whereby culturing is being done. Culturing is essentially what? It is similar to cultivating something, cultivating a belief, cultivating a way of life, cultivating a thinking. Okay? So culture, if you talk about, is a very, very ambiguous term in geographical literature. In fact, you can understand geographers have added to the various concepts and theories of culture which have existed for long period of time. So geographers, for example, think, अगर मैं geography और culture का एक छोटा सा relationship की बात करूं, think about this. Can I say कि अगर मैं suppose करो कि I am in my village, ठीक है, मेरा village ईस्टर्न उत्तर प्रदेश में पड़ता है. So suppose if I am in my village, there is lots of poverty, ठीक है, वहाँ पर बहुत poverty है. और suppose करो कि गर्मियों का दिन है, कैन आई से कि मैं वहाँ पर धोती और बनियान पहन के घूम सकता हूँ? एंड कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है, ठीक है, बिकॉज यू विल फाइंड मोस्ट ऑफ द पीपल हैविंग सिमिलर टाइप ऑफ ड्रेसअप, दे आर वर्किंग वेरी हार्ड इन द फील्ड्स, ठीक है, बट वही बनियान और धोती पहन के अगर मैं यहाँ शहर में घूमने लगूँ, व्हाट विल हैपन? सपोज मैं किसी दिन क्लास में आ जाता हूँ ऐसे, सो कैन यू अंडरस्टैंड दैट ज्योग्राफी essentially determines the culture which will be practiced. So culture also has essentially what? It has a context. And in many of the previous understandings of the culture, the theories of culture, this context had been missing. So one very important contribution of geography and in fact cultural geography to the domain of cultural studies has been understanding of this context of the culture, and thus geographers have come up with variety of meanings if you talk about of what culture is. In fact, in geography there are 9 to 10 prevalent meanings of what exactly the culture means, ठीक है, और ये सिंपल अंडरस्टैंडिंग ही हमें हमारे पर्सपेक्टिव को बिल्कुल ब्रॉडन कर देता है, क्वेश्चंस को समझने की जो क्षमता है उसको बढ़ा देता है. लाइक फॉर एग्जांपल अभी हमने एक लास्ट टॉपिक की बात की थी, लॉस ऑफ कल्चर्स, ठीक है. कैन आई से कि अगर मैं कल्चर को सिंपली एज अ वे ऑफ लाइफ समझूं, ठीक है, वेरियस एक्टिविटीज विच आर बीइंग प्रैक्टिस्ड बाय द पीपल ऑफ अ पर्टिकुलर एरिया, कैन आई से कि व्हेन आई विल राइट एन आंसर ऑन द लॉस ऑफ कल्चर, माय आंसर वुड बी मोर, यू कैन से, फ्रॉम अ सिंगल ओरिएंटेशन, एक ही तरीके से लिखा जाएगा, ठीक है. बट इफ आई अंडरस्टैंड कल्चर फ्रॉम वैरायटी ऑफ अदर मीनिंग्स, ठीक है, द वैरायटी ऑफ अदर डायमेंशंस ऑफ कल्चर, कैन आई से माय वे ऑफ राइटिंग द आंसर्स वुड डिफर इन अ वे. कैन यू अंडरस्टैंड? अगर हम किसी चीज को लॉस ऑफ कल्चर बोल रहे हैं और अगर हम इस चीज को मान लें कि कल्चर्स आर नॉट परमानेंट, when we are using the word loss of culture, actually there is a assumption that cultures are permanent, cultures are considered as a final product. Now think, if you don't consider the culture as a final product, can I say that rather than it is loss of culture, maybe it can be considered as enrichment of culture? Yes or no? ठीक है. Many of the cultural practices that we have learned, for example, in case of think about India, due to the colonization process, advent of Britishers, they colonized us, and colonization was one way of influencing our cultures. Can we say we have also enriched our cultures? There were many type of bad practices in our cultures, and over a period of time, those bad practices have been shed. Like take the example of sati, was one of the cultures. Take the example of the status of women, ठीक है. Can we say with the advent of westernization, have we been in a position to enrich our culture, make our culture better, ठीक है. So again, when you are answering such question, your perspective would differ. और क्वेश्चन में अगर ये लिखा होता, सपोज करो कि डिस्कस द लॉस ऑफ कल्चर और discuss the impact of globalization on loss of culture, can I say 99.9%, in fact 100% of the students who are not guidance students, they will be essentially just writing about how globalization and these phenomena are leading to the loss of cultures. Okay, but there is an enriched theory in geography which has developed on this theme of loss of culture, and there are various dimensions which have been discussed about what it means loss of culture, and what exactly is culture, how you define culture, and if you define culture as something which is not permanent, then how it is just extension of culture which is taking place, ठीक है. So can you understand? ये ठीक है, स्टूडेंट्स ने नहीं पढ़ रखा है, बट टीचर जो चेक कर रहा होगा कॉपी, उसने तो पढ़ रखा होगा, ठीक है. और जब उसने वहां पर डिस्कस वर्ड ऐड किया था, ठीक है, डिस्कस द इम्पैक्ट ऑफ ग्लोबलाइजेशन ऑन कल्चर्स, कैन आई से उसके दिमाग में तो वो था कि स्टूडेंट्स विल बी राइटिंग अबाउट दिस एस्पेक्ट ऑफ कल्चर एज वेल, ठीक है. बट अगेन व्हाट विल हैपन, मोस्ट ऑफ द स्टूडेंट्स वुडंट राइट फिर उसके बाद दे विल गेट लेस मार्क्स एंड उसके बाद ब्ला ब्ला कंप्लेनिंग चालू हो जाएगा कि ऐसे नाइंसाफ़ी हो गया मेरे साथ, ज्योग्राफी इज़ अ बैड ऑप्शनल एटसेट्रा एटसेट्रा। ठीक है, कंप्लीट तो करो यार, पढ़ो तो ज्योग्राफी क्या है, देन यू विल नो व्हाई यू आर गेटिंग लेस मार्क्स। ठीक है, तो फर्स्ट वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट थिंग इज द कल्चर। कुछ चीजें इसके बारे में लिखते हैं, लिखो। कल्चर इज अ की कंसेप्ट, culture is a key concept in the contemporary human geography. In the contemporary human geography, for its perceived role, for its perceived role in shaping variations in shaping variations in social relations, in social relations and human environment interactions. And human environment interactions. To stop, however, culture is a very ambiguous term. Very ambiguous term, and there is great diversity, and there is great diversity in how the culture is defined. To stop, in fact, in 1995, Don Michel, Don Michel famously argued that there is no such thing, there is no such thing as culture. There is no such thing as culture. Thus, change the paragraph, full stop. Thus, in geography, the term culture carries variety of meanings. Change the paragraph. The use of culture in human geography, the use of culture in human geography has been heavily influenced, by the works of cultural studies scholar Raymond Williams. Cultural studies scholar Raymond Williams. To stop, Williams notes the complexity of culture as a concept and ranks culture as one of the three most complicated words, and ranks culture as one of the three most complicated words in English. In English. Full stop. As a result, there are at least 9 to 10 key ideas, 9 to 10 key ideas associated with the use of culture, associated with the use of culture in contemporary English speaking cultural geography. ठीक है. So let us talk about these meanings first. So the first key idea of culture is basically what? It is something which is aesthetic type of development, intellectual, spiritual kind of development. Okay. So if it is something which is aesthetic, intellectual type of development, it is essentially connected with what? It is connected with the progress of civilization. Okay. So first लिखो. The first key idea is that culture is associated with intellectual, spiritual, and aesthetic development. So stop. In this usage, culture is strongly associated with ideas of civilization and progress. So tell me, from this meaning of culture, can we say this is one of the bases through which we distinguish between human and non-human? Okay, because human beings have culture. Animals, if you talk about, on the other hand, or other living beings, on the other hand, they are said to be devoid of culture. ठीक है, तो आगे लिखो. The development of culture is seen to distinguish people from animals and different groups of people from each other. To stop, this is the same idea of culture which is reflected in the perception that some people are more cultured than others. That is, the idea of cultural superiority. So you can understand this is one of the meanings. This cultural superiority idea, as we have said, was the basis of what? It was essentially the basis of colonization process, and it still remains. Okay. Then this is the first one. Second, according to Williams, culture is connected to you can write even in quotes, a particular way of life, comma, whether of a people, comma, a period, comma, a group or humanity in general. Full stop. This is the most common use of culture in geography and social sciences. Social sciences. Full stop. So way of life, when we are talking about way of life, can we say इसके अंदर बहुत सारी चीजें आ जाएंगी. It is sum total of all the activities which are done by a group or a society. So it would include, for example, the economic practices, the political practices, various other forms of social practices which are being followed by the people, the belief system, the various type of ideas which are generated. All of these, if you talk about, are inclusive in this meaning of the term culture. ठीक है, तो इसमें आगे लिखो. This idea of culture is examined. This idea of culture is examined through a range of elements, of cultures, including beliefs, ideas, values, symbols, things, languages, rules, laws and practices. ठीक है. One notion which is very important in this understanding of culture is that, can we say, this idea tells us that culture is something which is shared by at least a group of people. ठीक है, so इसमें लिख लो, important to this notion of culture is the idea that culture is shared by a group, Full stop. Culture is a marker of group difference. It is actively practiced. Full stop. People reproduce the elements of culture. Through participating in activities. ठीक है. सो अगर हम इसको अगर एक मीनिंग लें कल्चर का, तो इट बिकम्स वेरी क्लियर दैट कल्चर इज नॉट सिंपली समथिंग विच इज पास डाउन फ्रॉम वन जनरेशन टू अदर. ठीक है. मेनी कल्चर्स, इफ यू टॉक अबाउट, हैव बीन पास डाउन टू अस बाय आवर फैमिलीज. ठीक है. बट कैन वी से वी हैव ड्रॉप्ड मेनी ऑफ दीज कल्चर्स. ठीक है. लाइक एक कॉमन मेरे साथ जो अक्सर होता है कि जब भी व्हेन यू गो इन अ ग्रुपिंग और सम काइंड ऑफ फंक्शन एटसेट्रा, मेरे पेरेंट्स हमेशा मुझे फोर्स करते थे बचपन से ही कि पैर छूने हैं सबके, बड़े जितने भी हैं सबके पैर छूने. बट मैं थोड़ा रिबेलियस था, तो आई यूज टू आस्क दिस क्वेश्चन, क्यों छूने भाई, व्हाट इज द रीज़न. ठीक है. जिसका मेरा मन करेगा मैं छूऊंगा, और मेरा क्राइटेरिया पैर छूने का बिल्कुल सिंपल था, जो मुझे पैसे देगा उसके छूऊंगा, अदरवाइज नहीं. So ultimately, many of the cultures, if you talk about, which we are practicing today, which is way of our life, they have become us our way of life by us practicing those cultures. ठीक है, that means culture is not something just passed on, it is produced and reproduced. ठीक है, तो आगे लिख लो, therefore culture is not simply passed down, and inherited, comma, but rather deliberately created and recreated through practice. ठीक है, so this is the second important meaning of the term culture. A third important meaning of the culture, if you talk about, it is more related with artistic activities which are associated with variety of culture, the material beings of the culture. So इसको लिखो, the third meaning of culture is associated with artistic activities, comma, for example, music, literature, painting, sculpture, theater and films, etc. ठीक है, so can we say ये third meaning of culture हमारे सिलेबस में है पेपर 1 में GS. When we are talking about history and culture, we are mostly focused upon this third meaning of the study of cultures. ठीक है, तो इसमें लिखो, geographers have examined the meanings found in artistic activities. Full stop. For example, investigating the meanings of song lyrics, paintings or films. ठीक है, so everything has essentially a meaning. ठीक है, so many if you look into our cultures, there are so many type of paintings, cultural symbols, etc., and they all have, if you look into, several type of hidden meanings in them, and they want to propagate certain type of ideas which ultimately are to be followed by the people. ठीक है, so for example, if you talk about one cultural practice, many type of cultural practices have, like for example, अगर हम देखें इस्लामिक वर्ल्ड में, ठीक है, तो इस्लामिक वर्ल्ड में हमें बहुत सारे तरह के मोन्यूमेंट्स दिखाई पड़ते हैं. ठीक है, तो मोन्यूमेंट्स में एक खास बात सब में होती है कि देयर इज इन दी ऑल दीज मोन्यूमेंट्स विल बी फाइंडिंग देयर इज वाटर बॉडीज आर. ठीक है, लाइक फॉर एग्जांपल फाउंटेन्स विल बी वेरी कॉमन थिंग विच विल बी फाउंड. तो वो एक क्या है, एक सिंबल की तरह, एंड वो सिंबल बेसिकली वहाँ पर क्या सिंबल डिनोट करता है, बिकॉज दिस कल्चर एसेंशियली डेवलप्ड इन डेजर्ट. In desert there is water scarcity, so having water in a desert is actually a symbol of prosperity. ठीक है, so every such kind of artistic themes, they have their own meanings which are inherent in them. ठीक है, आगे लिखो, other geographers have examined the so-called cultural economy. The so-called cultural economy, that is the business of producing cultural products. Full stop. Geographers have made connections between perceptions of cultural activities and considered how cultural activities are valued. To stop. In doing so, they have argued that some type of cultural activities are positioned at higher status than the others. ठीक है. So for think about, take the consumerist culture. In consumerist cultures, if you possess a very costly car, can I say it is highly valued. ठीक है. आपकी इज्जत सोसाइटी में थोड़ी ज़्यादा होगी. योर कल्चर विल बी कंसिडर्ड एज एन एलीट कल्चर. ठीक है. द वे यू आर ड्रेसिंग फॉर एग्जाम्पल, ठीक है, द वे यू ईट फॉर एग्जाम्पल, ठीक है. अब वो फोर्क लेकर के वो खाने में, ठीक है, इफ़ यू आर ईटिंग विद अ फोर्क, दैट इज़ वेरी कंसिडर्ड टू बी अ वेरी वेरी एलीट टाइप ऑफ कल्चर. लेकिन थिंक अबाउट दिस यार, दाल चावल खाने में मज़ा तो हाथ से ही आता है. ठीक है. भले ही मज़ा आ रहा हो ना आ रहा हो, अल्टीमेटली इट इज़ व्हाट इट इज़ कंसिडर्ड एज एन एलीट कल्चर. So some cultures in particular settings will be given greater priority, or they will be considered as essentially the elite cultures. ठीक है. So they are given more value than the others. So this is the third meaning of the term culture. फोर्थ पे आ जाते हैं. Cultural geographers have argued Cultural geographers have argued that culture is a process. That culture is a process. Full stop. Culture is not passed. Culture is not passed unchanged between generations. Full stop. Culture is actively produced by individuals and groups. ठीक है. This was similar to what we talked about in the second meaning of the culture. Related with this is the fifth meaning. पांचवें पे आ जाते हैं. This fourth meaning relates to the fifth point. This fourth meaning relates to the fifth point, that cultures form through interactions. Full stop. They are not fixed. Comma, but rather come about through the relations of groups of people with different ways of life. Full stop. the interactions between cultures may lead to mixing of cultures and the formation of new ways of life. ठीक है. सो बाद में देखेंगे कि 70s, मोर स्पेसिफिकली 80s in fact, this debate arose about the erosion of cultures. ठीक है. तो ये जो आइडिया इरोजन ऑफ कल्चर्स है, सरप्राइजिंगली यू कैन अंडरस्टैंड इट केम फ्रॉम द वेस्टर्न कंट्री. ठीक है. एंड द आइडिया वाज दैट with globalization you can understand the mobility of the human beings has increased, and it was also leading to large scale migration from developing world to developed world. ठीक है. एंड यू कैन अंडरस्टैंड पीपल, कैन वी से, हमने कंसेप्ट ऑफ प्लेस पढ़ा है तुआन का. तो तुआन सेज दैट पीपल आर कैरियर्स ऑफ प्लेस, दे कैरी प्लेस इन देयर माइंड. प्लेस इज एसेंशियली एसोसिएटेड विथ कल्चर. So in a way, people are carrier of their culture. So wherever they will go, what they will do, they will also carry their culture. And this will be reflected in many forms. Like for example, if I go in the Western countries today, can I say it, I will very commonly find number of things. Like for example, I will find दो तीन चीज़ें ज़रूर मिल जाएंगी. एक चाइनीज़ फूड और इंडियन मसाला फूड सब जगह आज के टाइम में अवेलेबल है, बिकॉज इंडियंस हैव बीन लिविंग देयर. ठीक है. यू कैन अंडरस्टैंड दैट नंबर ऑफ चेंजेस इन द लैंडस्केप हैव टेकन प्लेस, लाइक प्लेसेस ऑफ वर्शिप. ठीक है. वैरायटी ऑफ, देयर आर मॉस्क्स विच आर देयर आर मंदिर्स विच आर देयर. ठीक है. सो देयर वाज वन जोक विच वाज अल्टीमेटली अ मीम विच आई रेड ऑन द इंटरनेट. तो उसमें देयर वाज दिस काइंड ऑफ, एक बैरियर्स होते हैं ना, रोड पे बनाए जाते हैं इस तरह के राउंडेड बैरियर्स. ठीक है. तो एक जगह पर बैरियर था. ठीक है. इंडियंस उसको शिवलिंग समझ के दे स्टार्टेड टू वर्शिप इट. सो एसेंशियली दिस मीन्स व्हाट, वी आर कैरियर्स ऑफ आवर कल्चर. Wherever we find a place, a suitable place, we will start practicing our culture. And through it, what is happening, there was several Western theorists which ultimately considered it as what, there was erosion of the Western cultures taking place. There was too much mixing which was taking place. ठीक है. बट देखेंगे कि फिर से यहाँ पर वही प्रॉब्लम है कि when you are talking about the erosion of culture, it essentially means that you are considering a particular culture to be a final product. But you have to understand that cultures are never the final product. Okay, cultures keep on changing. This phenomena of changing of cultures has taken place throughout human history. And this phenomena, देखेंगे इसको कहते हैं cultural diffusion. There are various ways through which the cultures which have originated from a particular place, they diffuse to new areas. Okay? And there is so much intermixing of cultures, you cannot recognize which was the original cultures of the world. Many of the Western things you might have seen, Western cultural practices, they are also written, if you talk about, in the Hinduism. Okay? So you exactly don't know how the cultures have originated. Like for example, there is a debate going on, many of the cultural practices, whether they originated in the West or whether they originated in the East. Okay? So again, that has happened throughout the human history. Throughout, for example, take the recent time of colonization. Colonization mein, think about this, there was Britishers or other European nations or other developed countries, they colonized number of areas and they imparted to us various cultural practices. उनके cultures के साथ हमारे culture mix हो गए. ठीक है. So आज हमारा जो culture है, ठीक है, एक तरह से देखें तो सब impure है. If you take that purity of culture as an idea, the final product, then all of us are practicing those impure cultures. And it is not that we were only affected. They were also affected. For example, okay, you think about today, there is this tradition of tattoo. टैटू का ट्रेडिशन वेस्ट में बहुत ज़्यादा मतलब कॉमन ट्रेडिशन है. मेरी नानी की भी बॉडी पे बहुत सारे टैटू थे. तो टैटू एक्चुअली इफ यू लुक इनटू, इट वाज अ culture which was adopted by the west from the east. ठीक है. So again, cultures if you talk about, they are result of several such type of mixings which are there. ठीक है, आगे बढ़ते हैं. Sixth, the word culture is used to mark boundaries. The word culture is used to mark boundaries between qualitatively different things. Qualitatively different things. Full stop. Culture is juxtaposed. Culture is juxtaposed variously to nature, economy, and society. So how, for example, there is some cultures which are associated with or outcome of the natural phenomena or the nature or the environment. Some cultures can be considered more as economic cultures. Some of them can be considered simply as social cultures or social aspects of the culture. So again, there is this meaning. Then seventh, geographers have delineated material and symbolic elements of cultures. Material and symbolic elements of culture. Full stop. Considerable energy has been spent in recent years arguing for more research into the material aspect of culture. To stop, some geographers argue that more consideration is required of the mutual constitution of the material and symbolic elements of culture. ठीक है. तो बहुत सारे सिंबॉलिक एलिमेंट्स होते हैं ऑफ कल्चर. लाइक फॉर एग्जाम्पल, अगर हम देखें अपने बहुत सारे स्क्रिप्चर्स में और कल्चरल प्रैक्टिसेस में, तो वी विल सी, फॉर एग्जाम्पल अभी हम देखेंगे कि विल टॉक अबाउट द रेसेस विच आर प्रेजेंट इन इंडिया. हम देखेंगे कि जो फर्स्ट रेस थी इंडिया में जो आने वाली थी, प्रोबेबली दैट रेस वाज नेग्रिटोस. ठीक है. ऑल्दो ये कंफर्म नहीं है, देयर इज अ डिबेट बिटवीन द एंथ्रोपोलॉजिस्ट, बट द फर्स्ट रेस वाज नेग्रिटो. आफ्टर नेग्रिटो टू कम वर प्रोटो-ऑस्ट्रेलॉइड्स. ठीक है. प्रोटो-ऑस्ट्रेलॉइड्स आर द पीपल जो हमारे इफ यू लुक इनटू ट्राइबल पॉपुलेशन, जो सेंट्रल ट्राइबल बेल्ट है और सदर्न ट्राइबल बेल्ट है, वहाँ पर मिलते हैं. ठीक है. It is believed that negritos and proto-australoids combined, and today the people who are present, they are combination of that proto-australoids and negritos. तो देखेंगे इनके रेशियल फीचर्स, बाद में बात करते हैं कि व्हाट वर देयर रेशियल फीचर्स. फॉर एग्जांपल, वन कॉमन रेशियल फीचर्स that you will be finding was presence of flat nose. ठीक है, their nose is flat, it is not broad and flat nose. ये निग्रोइड जो रेस होता है उसका एक कॉमन ट्रेट है. एंड एनवायरमेंट ज्योग्राफी में वी विल सी देयर आर रीजंस फॉर द प्रेजेंस ऑफ सच ब्रॉड एंड फ्लैट नोजेस. ठीक है, अब तुम कल्चर को देखो कि हाउ द कल्चर हैज डेवलप्ड. अगर मैं रामायण में देखूं, ठीक है, तो शूर्पणखा के साथ क्या किया गया था, उसकी नाक काट दी गई थी. ठीक है, सो देयर वाज एसेंशियली व्हाट, अ सुपीरियर रेस. ठीक है, एंड दिस सुपीरियर रेस, बेसिकली ये जो रेस है ये कौन से लोग हैं, दीज आर मोस्टली मेडिटेरेनियंस एंड इफ यू टॉक अबाउट मोर आर्यंस. ठीक है, एंड ये बेसिकली जो रेस है ये मेनली कौन से लोग हैं, दीज आर मोर रिलेटेड विथ कॉकोसॉइड्स. कॉकोसॉइड्स, इफ यू टॉक अबाउट देयर फीचर्स आर, they have longer and more prominent nose. ठीक है, so there is a differentiation which was essentially being done कि अगर आपकी नाक काट दी गई तो essentially it has become, you have gone to a more derogatory culture. ठीक है, हम हमेशा ये फ्रेज भी यूज करते हैं, नाक कटवा दी. ठीक है, so there is a symbolic meaning behind it that it is used to taunt that you have become less cultured. ठीक है, so this is what we are talking about. There are several in materialistic things which are there are meanings. ठीक है, और भी तरह की चीजें, like for example, एक छोटा सा एग्जाम्पल थिंक अबाउट दिस. अगर हम देखें तो फैमिलीज के अंदर अगर विमेन रसोई में काम कर रही है, ठीक है, तो व्हाट विल हैपन, वन थिंग इज एक्सपेक्टेड ऑफ द विमेन कि सपोज शी इज वर्किंग, बर्तनों की आवाज़ नहीं आनी चाहिए. ठीक है, तो अगेन इट इज़ व्हाट, इट इज़ रिलेटेड विथ व्हाट, इट इज़ रिलेटेड विथ द पेट्रियार्की, अ सिस्टम ऑफ पेट्रियार्की विच हैज डेवलप्ड. Women's were meant to be silent, and it is also what, it is also practiced in every aspect of life. So many of the practices, many of the material beings, if you talk about, they have very strong meanings which are associated with it. And by practicing those things, what we are doing, we are adopting those certain type of cultures. ठीक है, so this is another, if you talk about meanings which have been decoded by the geographers or talked about by geographers in the study of culture. Next बात करते हैं. Contemporary cultural geography is focused on the links between culture and power. Culture and power. To stop, cultural geographers focus on the work that culture, or aspects of culture, do to advantage some groups, and disadvantage others. ठीक है, तो नंबर ऑफ थिंग्स, बहुत सारे एग्जाम्पल्स हैं. सपोज करो कि एक कल्चर इंडिया का, अगर हम एक कल्चर देखें, और ये बहुत सारे अगर देखोगे तो बहुत सारे अदर कल्चर्स में भी मिलता है, नॉट ओनली इन इंडियन कल्चर. यू विल बी फाइंडिंग कि सपोज किसी के घर में किसी की मौत हो गई, समवन हैज डाइड, देयर इज एसेंशियली अ लॉट्स ऑफ सेलिब्रेशन दैट यू हैव टू डू. ठीक है, इन अ वे यू कैन अंडरस्टैंड. ठीक है कि अगर कोई बूढ़ा आदमी मर रहा है तो लोग, घर के लोग खुश होंगे कि गया बुढ़ा, लेकिन मेनी टाइम्स इट इज हैपनिंग दैट ultimately you have lost someone very young, someone who was not going to die, then what is there to celebrate? ठीक है, देर कैन बी, हम बहुत सारे स्पिरिचुअल रीजंस बोल सकते हैं एटसेट्रा एटसेट्रा, ठीक है, बट देर इज नथिंग एज सच टू सेलिब्रेट. एंड कैन यू अंडरस्टैंड, particularly for poor people, it is a very very big burden. Think about this, कि एक गरीब आदमी हो सकता है कि उसके घर में भूखमरी से मौत हुई हो, एंड अल्टीमेटली फॉर आत्मा की शांति के लिए उसको सर्टेन रिचुअल्स फॉलो करने, और उस रिचुअल से फायदा किसका हो रहा है? द क्लास विच डज नथिंग एंड अल्टीमेटली हैज बीन एंजॉइंग फॉर सेंचुरीज. ठीक है, सो अगेन several type of cultures, there is culture is in a way what it is, a way of showing power. It is a tool of the powerful through which you are able to make people agree with what you want to your own advantages. ठीक है, so this is the another meaning of the term cultures. In fact, in this context, जो अभी हमने एक term use किया था, आगे लिखो. In this context, Don Michel सभी सिविलाइजेशन में होता है, बहुत सारे सिविलाइजेशंस में है. लाइक फॉर एग्जांपल अगर हम देखें तो जो यूरोपियन कल्चर्स हैं, जो क्रिश्चियन कल्चर्स हैं, वहाँ पर भी इस तरह के कल्चरल सुपीरियोरिटी के फिनोमेना डेवलप हुए. लाइक फॉर एग्जांपल द स्टेटस ऑफ द प्रीस्ट वहाँ पर भी है. ठीक है, दे आर रिगार्डेड हायर स्टेटस. तो ये जो मैंने बोला ना कि ये इंडियन एक केस है, बिकॉज वी आर मोर क्लोज टू इंडिया, तो दैट इज आई फील कि हम ज़्यादा बेटर अंडरस्टैंड कर सकते हैं. ओके, इसमें लिखो, अकॉर्डिंग टू डॉन मिशेल, देयर इज नो कल्चर इन द वर्ल्ड, देयर इज नो कल्चर इन द वर्ल्ड, comma, only differing arrays, only differing arrays of power that organize society, in particular ways, full stop. Hence, there is only a powerful idea of culture, comma, an idea that has developed under specific historical conditions and was later broadened as a means of explaining material differences, comma, social order and relations of power. ठीक है, दैट मीन्स अगर हम किसी कल्चर को बोल रहे हैं कि इंडिया का कल्चर है, ठीक है, जैसे हम बात करते हैं इंडिक कल्चर, ठीक है, कैन आई से कि वी कैन से दैट इट इज द डोमिनेंट कल्चर विच इज बीइंग रिकॉग्नाइज्ड एज द इंडिक कल्चर. ठीक है, देयर आर मल्टीपल कल्चर्स विच आर प्रेवलेंट इन केस ऑफ इंडिया. ठीक है, what we are recognizing only is the dominant culture as, and we are associating it with a particular society, with a particular place. ठीक है, and from this comes the next meaning of the culture. इसको लिखो, Much of work in cultural geography in recent times, draws on the notion, draws on a notion that there are many cultures, full stop. In other words, there is plurality of cultures, plurality of cultures, full stop. This idea is reflected, this idea is reflected in how some cultural geographers have started using the word cultures, cultures rather than culture which is singular. ठीक है. So this is essentially the various meanings of culture which are associated with geography or human geography. ठीक है. इन एक 10th पॉइंट भी है कि अगर हम बात करें, 10th पॉइंट लिख लो. Human geographers have used geographer culture thus broadly in three different ways. So ये three different ways क्या है? One, culture in binary with another key term. Binary with another key term. So here culture is used as a boundary. Like for example, if you talk about the debate of culture, nature, ये देखा है हमने, it has been a very important key theme in geographical studies. और culture and economy, culture and society. ठीक है. So this is one way in which the culture has developed in geographical studies. Second, if you talk about, it is culture of. Here culture is used as a process. Thus the practices of particular groups like for example cultures of poverty, cultures of consumption, culture of resistance, ठीक है. So this is essentially the second meaning of the culture. Then एक तीसरा कल्चर और कल्चर्स. इसका मतलब है here culture is referred as the way of life, is referred as a way of life associated with particular practices. Like for example, it can be associated with particular time period. It can be associated with particular time period. और इसका एग्जाम्पल क्या है? कैन वी से हम आज की डेट में जैसे बात करते हैं प्रेजेंस ऑफ मॉडर्न कल्चर्स, मिडीवियल कल्चर्स, एंशियंट कल्चर्स, प्राइमोर्डियल कल्चर्स, ये सब क्या है? दीज आर एसोसिएटेड विथ टाइम पीरियड. सो इट इज अ वे ऑफ लाइफ. सिमिलरली कल्चर associated with ethnicity, nationality, etc. Like for example, Indic culture, Anglo-American culture, African culture. Similarly, culture associated with oppression, like for example, tell me one example, good example can be colonial cultures, cultures associated with gender, like feminist culture, cultures associated with sexuality, like gay culture, cultures associated with class, like the terms you might have heard about working class culture, welfare culture. ठीक है. So there are various such kind of ways of life, these are defined. So this is the summary. The 10th was essentially summary of all the things which we have talked about. So there are variety of meanings in which the term culture has been used in cultural geography. ठीक है. Okay, then let us move into development of cultural geography. Development of cultural geography. तो अगर हम बात करें कि डेवलपमेंट ऑफ कल्चरल ज्योग्राफी, वी डेफिनेटली फाइंड दैट देयर हैज बीन वेरियस फेजेस in the development of cultural geography, and these phases in the development of cultural geography are actually associated also with if you talk about the meaning of the term culture as it was used. ठीक है. So for example, if you talk about, अगर हम देखें तो culture as a part of geography has great antiquity. For example, cultural studies or study of culture was present in the works of Greco-Roman geographers. हमने देखा है that Greco-Roman geographers also talked about culture. Whether if you talk about it was Homer, whether if you talk about it was Herodotus, whether if you talk about Strabo, all of these, particularly Strabo, we have seen that his main focus of study was cultures. ठीक है. Comparative cultures he used to study. Then if you talk about, if you look into later in the medieval period, there was study of the cultures associated with Al-Biruni, for example, हमने देखा है. There he was the Strabo of the medieval period. So there also we find that there was study of cultures. Then later in the classical period also we find that culture was also studied by Karl Ritter, ठीक है, in his regional geography. Then you again find that the study of cultures are associated with the works of other geographers. Like for example, if you look into the works of Ratzel, in his volume 2, he has again discussed the relationship between the environment and variety of cultural practices. ठीक है. So there also you find the work of or cultural geographer, or in a way he has written about culture. Then you find that there was others like Hettner. He has also written about the role of culture. ठीक है. If you talk about Schluter, his contemporary, he has also discussed about culture. Similarly, at the same time, there was Vidal de Lablache. He has also discussed about the role of culture. So, variety of geographers have discussed about this meaning of the term culture. Throughout this time period, if you actually look into this meaning of the term culture or development of cultural geography, before quantitative revolution, till the period of quantitative revolution, we find that the cultural geography was not the main theme of geography. ठीक है. It was essentially a subordinate theme of geography, as geography essentially more focused upon study of physical geography. Although within human geography there was study of some cultural aspects of the, or were basically being studied, but it was always a secondary theme of geography. And here यहाँ पर जो focus था वो किस पर था? Focus इस पर था relationship of environment और culture को समझने पर. ठीक है. Ultimately ये जो nature relationship between nature and culture, it also ultimately gave another meaning to the term culture. जो अभी हमने meaning देखा था, superiority of cultures. So certain cultures were started to being considered as what? As more superior compared to the other cultures. During this entire period, the focus of cultural geography was mostly on the materialistic, if you talk about aspects of the culture. How the culture is reflected in the ways of life, how the culture, if you talk about, is particularly reflected in the art, if you talk about architecture and all these kind of things. And since it was very much related with the landscape, so in the study of culture, very important phenomena which was there, which essentially was studied, was the study of cultural regions of the world. Okay, that means the cultural landscapes of the world. So this was the very core theme. So that was the period, if you talk about, of cultural geography, first phase. Second phase, it was during the quantitative revolution, the study of cultural geography. And if you talk about during the quantitative revolution, again you can understand cultural geography studied reached to its lowest point. Okay? Because here the focus was in human geography was on different aspects. Okay? So more on the economic aspects the studies focused upon, more on theory building rather than the study of cultures. But during this period also, there was other things, particularly the speciality of cultures was very much focused upon. And here new concepts developed. Like for example, it was during this period, the conception of diffusion of culture. Okay? So here what developed? The understanding of the mobility of cultures, that cultures can also be mobile. And what are the ways in which the cultures are mobile? This idea essentially developed during this period. So cultural diffusion का जो concept था, it was, we will see that it was Hegerstrand who developed the concept of diffusion. And this same idea of diffusion was also used in understanding the spread of cultures and the mobility of the cultures. Okay? So despite at its being lowest, number of new ideas, themes developed during this period, like the hearth, cultural hearths, for example. Cultural hearth is an area from where actually the culture originates. And once a culture originates from one point, it would expand in time and space. It would spread in time and space. And this phenomena is diffusion, and variety of ways through which we will see diffusion is taking place. Okay. So this was the development of cultural geography during this period. Then ultimately what happened after the demise of quantitative revolution, then started the cultural turn in geography. And this cultural turn in geography was essentially brought about by what? In the beginning, it was themes like radicalism, themes like humanism, which brought a new perspective in the study of cultures. And from here, what happened? New type of themes began to develop. Like, for example, study of several subjective themes started to, we also started to study the subjective aspects of the culture, which were never studied in geography, in human geography before. Like, for example, the ways of life of the people, how people think, like various meanings of the places, various meanings of, for example, think about this. Can we say religion, can it mean different for different people belonging to the same society? In fact, same religion, same caste. Okay. So again, this kind of explorations began. This phenomena of cultural turn deepened in 1980s. Okay, when ultimately there was postmodernism phenomena which developed, and there was a real cultural turn since then. And we will see that cultural turn has further led to the changes in how the culture is studied today. Okay, so that is basically how the cultural geography has developed. So लिख लेते हैं इसको. Cultural geography has great antiquity, in geographical studies, as it can be seen even in the works of Greco-Roman geographers. Full stop. There are three phases of development, of cultural geography. तो फेज 1 की बात करते हैं. इट इज कल्चर एज बाइनरी. So this study was till QR, or till नहीं, sorry, pre quantitative revolution. तो इसमें लिखो जनरल एक पॉइंट. ड्यूरिंग दिस पीरियड culture was studied in binary with other key terms. More specifically with environment. So stop. For example, during the Greco-Roman period, Strabo focused on the study of comparative cultures. And associated specific type of cultures with the given regions. So stop. Similar endeavor was undertaken by Al-Biruni in the medieval period. In the medieval period. So stop. In the pre-modern period, Karl Ritter studied the cultures through the framework of continents and subcontinents. Through the framework of continents and subcontinents. So stop. Later in the modern period, Ratzel, in his Anthropogeography Volume 2, associated specific cultures with compulsions of the compulsions of environment, with the compulsions of environment. To stop. Further later, in the inter-World War period, Carl Sawyer associated cultures with specific natural landscapes. Full stop. This idea had already been resonated in the works of Vidal in France and Schluter in Germany. In the past. To stop. Change the paragraph. Thus, during this period, the focus of cultural geography was on highlighting the materialistic and visible aspects of culture, which were thought to be associated with given regions. So stop. Thus, the study of cultural landscape or cultural region dominated the cultural geography of this period. Particularly in the first half of 20th century. Change the paragraph. Some of the studies of culture also highlighted the idea of superiority of cultures, idea of superiority of some cultures Full stop. This was essentially used to justify the process of colonization. Then phase two, culture as a process. Culture as a process. So this is the during QR. इसमें लिखो during the quantitative revolution, study of humans and their associated cultures reached at its lowest point. So stop. QR guided by logical positivism. Considered it appropriate to exclude the study of culture due to the subjectivity involved. In it. So stop. Despite its low, there was undercurrent of cultural geography which remained in the form of the Berkeley School of Carl Sawyer. Berkeley School of Carl Sawyer. Full stop. During this period, cultural geography adopted new concepts to understand the mobility of cultures. Full stop. As culture was seen as a process, it was believed that cultures also diffuse in time and space. To stop. Thus, from the works of Hegerstand, the theory of cultural diffusion was developed and used to explain the distribution of present cultural practices. Okay, so this is phase 2 and phase 3. In the post-quantitative revolution, in the post-quantitative revolution period, geography has experienced a cultural turn. Geography has experienced a cultural turn where there has been an increasing focus. There has been an increasing focus on the study of culture within human geography. On the study of culture within human geography. So stop. More specifically, cultural turn is a term that describes a broad set of shifts in the social sciences and humanities. In the social sciences and humanities, full stop. It started in 1970s but has become dominant in late 1980s and early 1990s. So stop. It is a vague and contested term. Vague and contested term which at its roots indicates the enlargement of the purview of human geography after the late 1980s. Full stop. This enlargement was done through introducing numerous new cultural subject matters and a range of new conceptual resources for doing justice to the subject matter of culture. Since 1980s, you can change the paragraph in fact. Since 1980s, cultural geography has seen 3 new editions. So first new edition is the cultural turn 1, which is essentially related with finding new subject matters. Okay, finding the new subject matter. So what has essentially happened since the देखो इसमें the narrowest sense of cultural turn refers to progressive opening up of human geography to a whole range of new subject matters, to a whole range of new subject matters. Full stop. Earlier, the cultural geography focused only on the study of material characteristics of the culture and cultural landscape. Full stop. However, by 1980s, there was growing interest in part of many geographers to study many other subject matters clubbed under the word culture. Clubbed under the word culture. Like for example, how the culture influences the economy, political relations, etc. in the society. Besides study of various elements of culture which were neglected earlier, So new type of subject matters were added. Second, cultural turn to, and this is associated with discovering the immaterial. Discovering the immaterial. Full stop. इसमें लिखो आगे. Since the development of humanistic approach, cultural geography has started to focus on study of the subjective aspects or subjective domains of culture. Full stop. This is reflected in number of types of studies. Like for example, the idea of sense of place, meanings and symbols associated with religious places, hermeneutics देखा था हमने. It is essentially what? It is discovery of the meanings. So hermeneutics of various cultural phenomena. So this is the second change which is very much perceptible. Third, तो ये इममटीरियल की स्टडी इंपॉर्टेंट हो गया. इसकी वजह से क्या हुआ है, बहुत सारे सब्जेक्ट मैटर्स जो पहले एग्जिस्ट नहीं करते थे, दे हैव स्टार्टेड टू कम इनटू बीइंग. ठीक है, जैसे पहले हम क्या पढ़ते थे, अगर मैं एक सिंपल सा एक एग्जांपल लूं, देयर वाज स्टडी ऑफ रिलीजन. ठीक है, बट रिलीजन में जो फोकस पॉइंट होता था वो किस पर होता था? ऑन अंडरस्टैंडिंग द डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन ऑफ रिलीजन. ठीक है, दैट वाज द मेन कोर ऑफ कल्चरल ज्योग्राफी. But after this period, what has happened? We are not just studying the distribution of religion, we are also concerned about various aspects of religion, influence of religion, how religion determines various cultural phenomena, perceptibly as well as imperceptibly. ठीक है, how religion, if you talk about influences power relationships. ठीक है, so all these kind of new subject matters were added. अभी जैसे हमने एक बात किया रिलीजियस प्लेसेस. तो फॉर एग्जाम्पल द कंसेप्ट ऑफ व्हाट इज द सेंस ऑफ दैट रिलीजियस प्लेस. ठीक है, व्हाई सर्टेन प्लेसेस आर कंसिडर्ड एज रिलीजियस, व्हाई अदर्स आर नॉट. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, कहीं पर हम पेड़ की पूजा कर रहे हैं और कहीं पर उसी तरह के पेड़ को काट रहे हैं. तो व्हाट मेक्स अ पर्टिकुलर प्लेस गेट दैट सेंस ऑफ रिलीजियसनेस. ठीक है, सेक्रेड प्लेसेस का कंसेप्ट. सो न्यू थीम्स were added in the study of cultural geography as a result of it. ठीक है, and third, cultural turn 3 is associations with the posts. एसोसिएशंस विद द पोस्ट्स. तो हमने ज्योग्राफी के अंदर देखा है कि सिंस लेट 80s देयर वाज डेवलपमेंट ऑफ थीम्स लाइक पोस्ट मॉडर्निज्म, पोस्ट स्ट्रक्चरलिज्म. इस तरह की थीम्स डेवलप होती हैं ज्योग्राफी के अंदर. तो वेरी मच एसोसिएटेड विद दिस कल्चरल टर्न वाज दिस पोस्ट. ठीक है, अगर याद हो तो मैंने बताया था कि पोस्ट मॉडर्निज्म का बेसिक आइडिया ये है. पोस्ट मॉडर्निज्म कहता है कि देयर इज एवरीथिंग इज डिफरेंट फ्रॉम अदर. ठीक है, so there is great amount of spatial diversity, and this great amount of spatial diversity अगर हम बात करें तो स्पेस में अगर सपोज एक फिनोमेना है तो हमें उसको कैसे पढ़ना चाहिए? उसी टाइम और स्पेस में पढ़ना चाहिए. देयर इज नो नीड टू एसोसिएट इट विद द पास्ट. दैट मीन्स एवरीथिंग इज डिफरेंट फ्रॉम अदर. ठीक है, सो दिस डाइवर्सिटी ऑफ कल्चर and its studies have also permeated into cultural geography. So with this, what has happened? Being associated with particular postmodernism, cultural turn or cultural turn in cultural geography, it has led to study of culture as cultures. अभी जो हमने बात किया था culture as cultures. ठीक है, so इसको लिख लो. Since late 1980s, the development of postmodernism has also impacted the study of cultural geography. Full stop. The idea of spatial diversity and uniqueness inherent in postmodernism and post geographies is also reflected in cultural studies. Cultural studies, which believes that there actually exists a diversity of cultures rather than a singular culture. In any given landscape. So stop. Thus, many cultural geographers have preferred to use the term cultures the term cultures rather than culture. आगे लिखो. During this period, there has also been development of critical cultural geography. Critical cultural geography, which is a byproduct of structuralism in human geography. स्ट्रक्चरलिज्म इन ह्यूमन ज्योग्राफी, इसके बारे में मैंने डिटेल में लिखवाया था, इफ यू रिमेंबर, रेडिकलिज्म वाले टॉपिक के अंदर. ठीक है, इसको हमने क्या बोला था, दिस वाज आल्सो रेफर टू एज द न्यू कल्चरल ज्योग्राफी. ठीक है, so that is what has changed in, if you talk about the study of cultural geography, so that is the study of cultural geography और डेवलपमेंट ऑफ कल्चरल ज्योग्राफी. अब आगे बढ़ते हैं अपने टॉपिक्स की ओर. तो कल्चरल टर्न हमने देख लिया कि बेसिकली कल्चरल टर्न क्या था. इन सिंपल सेंस कल्चरल टर्न एक ऐसा जंक्चर था ज्योग्राफी के अंदर वेयर व्हाट हैपेंड, देयर वाज इंक्रीजिंग फोकस ऑन द स्टडी ऑफ कल्चर एंड हाउ कल्चर डिटरमाइंस एंड इज इंटरलिंक्ड विथ वेरियस अदर ज्योग्राफिकल फिनोमेना. ठीक है, तो इसी को हमने ज्योग्राफी में कल्चरल टर्न बोला. ये स्टार्ट तो होता है 1970s से, पर्टिकुलरली विद द बिगिनिंग ऑफ ह्यूमनिज्म एंड रेडिकलिज्म. ठीक है, बट मोर अगर हम बात करें, द रियल डेवलपमेंट ऑफ द कल्चरल टर्न इन ज्योग्राफी हैज अकर्ड सिंस 1980s. ठीक है, और ये कल्चरल टर्न 3 पार्ट्स में मैनिफेस्टेड था. वन वॉज द स्टडी ऑफ इममटीरियल जो हमने बात किया. Other, if you talk about, second was the study of various new themes. ठीक है, and third, if you talk about the its association with the posts. ठीक है, that means the cultural diversity phenomena. तो जब मुझे cultural turn के बारे में think करना है तो I'll always think in this manner. ठीक है, एक क्वेश्चन पूछा गया था एग्जाम में, if you have PYQ मुझे देना जरा. यू कैन सी, ये क्वेश्चन आया था 2018 में. ज्योग्राफी इज अ कंटेस्टेड, इफ यू वांट टू राइट यू कैन राइट, ज्योग्राफी इज अ कंटेस्टेड and multi-paradigmatic discipline with a strong Eurocentricity that has only recently been challenged. Comment. It was asked as a 10 marker in 2018. ठीक है, कैन यू अंडरस्टैंड? यहां पर जब ये बोल रहा है दैट हैज ओनली रिसेंटली बीन चैलेंज, इट हैज बीन कैरेक्टराइज्ड बाय स्ट्रॉन्ग यूरोसेंट्रिसिटी. ठीक है, तो यहां पर इनडायरेक्टली व्हाट इज बीइंग मेंशन्ड, It is mentioning the cultural turn. यूरोसेंट्रिसिटी जो ज्योग्राफी में थी वो यूरोपियन कल्चर्स का रिफ्लेक्शन था, एंड whether it developed in America, whether it developed in Europe, it was that same materialistic European culture. So the focus of study, the themes of study used to be what? It used to be the materialistic things. ठीक है, तो वहां पर हमें ये चैलेंज आया recent times में, where immaterial also started to get studied. ठीक है, इफ यू टॉक अबाउट, एक फोकस हुआ करता था ऑन द केस ऑफ सर्टेन टाइप ऑफ डोमिनेंस ऑफ कल्चर. ठीक है, कल्चरल सुपीरियोरिटी, यूरोसेंट्रिसिटी, एक पर्टिकुलर कल्चर के पर्सपेक्टिव से चीज़ों को स्टडी कर रहे हैं. लाइक फॉर एग्जांपल टेक द केस ऑफ डेवलपमेंट ज्योग्राफी. ठीक है, इकोनॉमिक डेवलपमेंट का कंसेप्ट. कहना इसे कि अभी भी अगर हम एक्चुअली में देखें इन प्रैक्टिकल टर्म्स, आज भी जो हम डेवलपमेंट समझते हैं, दिस डेवलपमेंट इज मोर यूरोसेंट्रिक. ठीक है, इट इज एसेंशियली मोर यूरोसेंट्रिक, उसमें कोई डाउट नहीं है. कैन वी से कि डेवलपमेंट के यार और भी मीनिंग्स हो सकते हैं. किसी के लिए डेवलपमेंट का मतलब तो ये भी हो सकता है ना, पीस ऑफ माइंड. एंड इफ यू आर रनिंग बिहाइंड फॉर एग्जाम्पल मटेरियलिस्टिक वेल बीइंग, देन मे बी यू आर लूजिंग योर पीस ऑफ माइंड. So that is not development in many of the cultures, many of the societies. And to think that they are underdeveloped is again what? It is injustice to academics, because they have their own particular type of culture. So that is basically that this type of cultural challenge has come up in more recent times. And in fact देखेंगे बाद में कि anti development thesis develop हुआ, so etc., many type of such challenges have risen. So mainly ये idea क्या कह रहा था, इसी cultural turn के बारे में बात कर रहा था कि only which has recently come up. But obvious सी बात है, if I haven't studied this concept, I will not be exactly aware of what this question was about and what needed to be written. Although यहाँ पर इतना space नहीं था, because you had to also write geography is contested and multi-paradigmatic discipline with a स्ट्रॉन्ग यूरोसेंट्रिसिटी, यानी कि 3 पार्ट्स एक्सप्लेन करने थे. सबसे पहले कैसे वो कंटेस्टेड एंड मल्टी पैराडाइमेटिक डिसिप्लिन है, हाउ स्टिल देयर इज डिस्पाइट दैट देयर हैज बीन स्ट्रॉन्ग यूरोसेंट्रिसिटी, एंड हाउ इन रीसेंट टाइम्स दिस हैज बीन चैलेंज. ठीक है, सो दैट मीन्स यू डिड नॉट हैड मोर स्पेस टू राइट. एट मैक्स यू कुड हैव रिटन 40-50 वर्ड्स, इससे ज़्यादा नहीं लिख सकते. बट स्टिल वो understanding of the concept was very important to answer this, to decode what was the meaning of this recently challenge and to give appropriate examples for that. ठीक है, that is the case of cultural turn. आगे बढ़ते. Another concept is the phenomena of cultural diffusion. The theory of cultural diffusion. तो अभी हम देखेंगे कि कल्चरल डिफ्यूजन मेनली क्या है. इट सिंपली रेफर्स टू ओरिजिन ऑफ कल्चर एट वन प्लेस एंड देन स्प्रेड ऑफ कल्चर इन टाइम एंड स्पेस. दिस फिनोमेना इज रेफर टू एज कल्चरल डिफ्यूजन. तो एक लाइन पहले लिखते हैं. The first use of cultural diffusion goes back to American anthropologist Alfred Kroeber's influential paper Stimulus Diffusion, which was written in 1944. Full stop. Since then, The concept of diffusion, the concept of diffusion has been used across many disciplines. Full stop. For geographers, the concept is used to map, the mobility of both tangible and intangible culture over space. Over space. Full stop. The Swedish geographer Torsten Hegerstrand has contributed most to the study of spatial diffusion processes. Full stop. Thus, many of the conceptual paradigms of diffusion comes from Swedish school of spatial diffusion. Spatial diffusion. Okay, so this is what is essentially the context of cultural diffusion. Now, question is, what is cultural diffusion? तो इसको लिखो, cultural diffusion is a phenomena whereby cultures develop and spread in time and space. To stop. In this definition, there are two inherent concepts involved. So first inherent concept क्या है? First is the cultures originate from particular places. And these particular places are referred to as the cultural earths. ठीक है, so cultural hearth क्या है? It is a place of the origin of particular or specific culture. Second, culture is a dynamic concept. Which spread as well as changes in time and space. ठीक है, so this is what we mean by the term cultural diffusion. Always, normally what will happen, the phenomena of cultural diffusion will be slow over time and in space. ठीक है, so ऑलरेडी हमने इसकी बात किया है. वैरायटी ऑफ कल्चर्स they will be essentially developing. So this is cultural diffusion taking place. This is essentially the time, and initially a culture which originated, it would be dominated by the pioneers, then it would be adopted by the adapters, and then only some laggards will adopt the idea. ठीक है? So one important thing about the cultural diffusion is that one cultural diffusion is a slow process. It is a slow process. Second important thing about cultural diffusion is that cultural diffusion is never uniform in space. ठीक है? Why it is never uniform in space? Because there are barriers to diffusion. As there are barriers to diffusion. ठीक है? So अब इसमें दो चीजें निकल के आ रही हैं. Cultural diffusion is a slow process. So that means cultural diffusion has a pattern. If you talk about a certain rate at which it diffuses in time. ठीक है? This rate of diffusion is determined by what? It is determined by the mode of diffusion. ठीक है? So it is आगे लिखो उसमें, rate of cultural diffusion is function of the mode or type of cultural diffusion involved. Mode or type of cultural diffusion involved. तो अगर हम इसमें बात करें mode or type of cultural diffusion, there are two types of cultural diffusion. ठीक है? One type of cultural diffusion is referred to as expansion diffusion. Second type of cultural diffusion is relocation. Relocation diffusion. ठीक है? So इसमें लिखो expansion diffusion में. In case of expansion diffusion, it is the idea or the culture that travels. It is the idea or the culture that travels and expands in time and space. Without the actual mobility of people. ठीक है? नेक्स्ट, रीलोकेशन डिफ्यूजन की अगर हम बात करें, इन दिस टाइप ऑफ डिफ्यूजन द आइडिया और द कल्चर मूव्स विथ द मोबिलिटी ऑफ ह्यूमन बींग्स. as they are carriers of culture. ठीक है? So expansion diffusion and relocation diffusion. एक्सपेंशन डिफ्यूजन दो तरीके का हो सकता है. वन टाइप ऑफ एक्सपेंशन डिफ्यूजन इज रेफर टू एज कंटेजियस. Contagious diffusion, and second type is referred to as the hierarchical. Hierarchical diffusion. ठीक है. So there are two types of expansion diffusion which are occurring. First बात करते हैं contagious diffusion. Contagious diffusion explains how ideas move rapidly. How ideas move rapidly through societies or communities through personal communication. Through personal communication, as people come in contact with each other. As people come in contact with each other. ठीक है. So this form of diffusion is referred to as contagious diffusion. So contagious diffusion, for example, suppose करो कि मैंने देखा कि किसी ने बहुत अच्छी सी शर्ट पहन रखी है. ठीक है, तो मुझे बहुत पसंद आया. Can I say कि it is possible I will also want to wear the same shirt? So this kind of adoption of a particular cultural practice is referred to as contagious diffusion. ठीक है. So can we say contagious diffusion? Can we say it is a universal process? ये किसी भी केस में होगा ही होगा. And it is a slow process. ठीक है. So लिख लो इसको. Contagious diffusion is a universal process. Yet it is very slow, as it is impacted by the frictional influence of distance. So you tell me, can we say कि अगर contagious diffusion हो रहा है, कॉन्टैक्ट टू कॉन्टैक्ट पीपल्स एक दूसरे से कॉन्टैक्ट में आएंगे, तो कैन आई से एज डिस्टेंस इंक्रीजेस, सपोज दिस वाज द अर्थ, व्हाट विल हैपन विद द डिफ्यूजन? इट वुड रिड्यूस, देयर विल बी डिस्टेंस डीके. ठीक है. बट कंटेजियस डिफ्यूजन यूनिवर्सल फिनोमेना होगा, हर जगह हो रहा होगा. देन कम्स द हायरार्किकल डिफ्यूजन. इसमें लिखो, इट इज द प्रोसेस of movement of culture from larger entities to smaller places. From larger entities to smaller places. Full stop. In this form of diffusion, a cultural idea is planted. A cultural idea is planted at the head of the society. At the head of the society, or at the top of the society. Full stop. Once adopted, the cultural diffusion is very fast. As there are larger resources to facilitate the process of cultural diffusion. So think about this. बाद में भी देखेंगे. Can we say कि ये जो हायरार्किकल डिफ्यूजन का मेथड है, ये बहुत सारे रिलीजन्स ने अडॉप्ट किया है. लाइक यू मस्ट हैव स्टडीड अबाउट बुद्धिज्म. तो बुद्धिज्म में क्या करते थे, दे यूज्ड टू कन्वर्ट मेनी ऑफ द किंग्स टू देयर फेथ, and ultimately through that what they used to do, they used to, once the king has converted to a particular faith, can I say king के पास बहुत सारे resources हैं, वो उस आइडिया को, वो उस कल्चर को बहुत फास्ट प्रोपगेट कर सकता है. ठीक है. सो दिस फॉर्म ऑफ डिफ्यूजन इज रेफर टू एज द हायरार्किकल डिफ्यूजन. लाइक अभी अगर हम देखें तो गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया एक नेशनल लैंग्वेज डेवलप करना चाहता है, एंड दे वांट दिस नेशनल लैंग्वेज टू बी हिंदी. And can we say कि this, the way they are developing, it is a form of hierarchical diffusion they are trying to do? Many ways are there. जैसे majority of, अगर हम देखें तो examinations जो होते हैं, they are either in Hindi or they are in English. That is one way they are doing. So many seminars etc. are being done. हिंदी दिवस मनाया जाता है. So all of these are basically what? Ways to faster propagate the Hindi as a language. So this is the phenomena of hierarchical diffusion. ठीक है. So that is the case of hierarchical diffusion. इसी तरह से relocation diffusion भी दो तरीके का हो सकता है. So relocation diffusion में one type of diffusion if you talk about is migration diffusion, and second is referred to as the missionary diffusion. तो इसमें लिखो माइग्रेशन डिफ्यूजन में humans are carriers of culture. Full stop. Thus, as they migrate, they also carry with themselves their cultural practices. To stop, this is also referred to as diaspora tendencies. Diaspora tendencies. ठीक है. Thus, through migration of the human beings, there is also diffusion of cultures. Diffusion of cultures taking place. ठीक है. सो यू कैन अंडरस्टैंड कि जब माइग्रेशन डिफ्यूजन से डिफ्यूजन हो रहा है तो कैन वी से इट कैन बी अ फास्ट फिनोमेना. ठीक है. तो इफ आई वांट टू गो, आई कैन गो टू एनी पार्ट ऑफ द वर्ल्ड एंड आई विल रीच in few days, and ultimately with me the culture has also reached there. So this phenomena is the migration diffusion. हम देखेंगे हिस्टोरिकली जो आज जो हमें कल्चर्स के स्प्रेड मिलते हैं, ये बहुत सारे जो कल्चर्स हैं, these have actually come from migration phenomena. They have migration diffusion. Like इंडिया में अगर हम देखें, हम देखेंगे कि बहुत सारी रेसेस इंडिया में आई रहने के लिए. So there was advent of negritos आए, there was proto-australoids आए. So each of them, what they did, they brought certain type of cultural practices with them. Later there was advent of Mediterraneans, ठीक है, जिसको हम बोलते हैं Indus Valley civilization. So they also brought certain type of cultural practices with them. Later there was the Aryans who arrived, and again they also brought certain type of cultural practices. उससे पहले Western Brachycephals आए, so they also brought certain type of cultural practices with them. और जो आज का जो इंडिक कल्चर है, इट हैज बिकम व्हाट, इट इज मिक्सचर ऑफ दीज कल्चर्स विच वर ब्रॉट बाय देम. ठीक है. फर्दर लेटर यू नो देयर वाज एडवेंट ऑफ If you talk about in the medieval period, there was advent of Islamic rulers who arrived in India. They also added certain type of cultural practices. Then there was further advent of Britishers into India. So there was उससे पहले जब मिडिवल पीरियड में पर्शियनाइजेशन हो गया हमारे कल्चर का, then there was westernization which has taken place, and today's culture is what? It is sum total of all these cultures which have arrived in India. So most of these cultures, they have come from where? They have come from migration, diffusion. Like एक छोटा सा एग्जाम्पल, जितनी लैंग्वेजेस हमें इंडिया में मिलती हैं, ठीक है, जो मेजर फैमिलीज ऑफ लैंग्वेजेस जो हैं, दे हैव एक्चुअली कम इनटू इंडिया फ्रॉम वेयर? फ्रॉम माइग्रेशन. ठीक है, because each of these races, they had their own set of languages which they were using. So that is an example of what? Migration, diffusion. हमने अभी बहुत सारे examples बात किए थे migration, diffusion के. Like we know that Chinese and Indians, they have migrated throughout the world. Can we say along with them their cuisines have migrated? For example, others like Europeans have also migrated. So you'll be finding several type of cuisines have become more global cuisines. Like take the case of Italian cuisine, like pizza. Okay. So again, most of these have become global through what? Through this migration, diffusion. So it is also a very, very common phenomena through which the cultural diffusion takes place. Then comes the missionary diffusion process. Cultural diffusion can also takes place as missionaries doing philanthropic works reach out to different parts of the world. Full stop. Through their philanthropic work, they can gain confidence of the people. And propagate their cultural ideas. ठीक है. तो यू कैन अंडरस्टैंड मिशनरी डिफ्यूजन भी एक बहुत कॉमन फॉर्म ऑफ डिफ्यूजन रहा है हिस्टोरिकली. अगर हम देखें तो रिलीजन्स में बहुत यूज हुआ है द यूज ऑफ मिशनरीज. आज के टाइम में देयर आर डिफरेंट ways, like for example there are several capitalists you will be finding they are doing lots of missionary foundation charity works. ठीक है, and through that वो जाकर के दूसरी कंट्रीज में अपने चैरिटी वर्क्स कर रहे हैं. उससे क्या हो रहा है? गवर्नमेंट्स का कॉन्फिडेंस दे आर गेनिंग and they are propagating certain type of cultures which they want to propagate. Basically idea simple है, to gain profit, and they are able to do that through that missionary work. So these are the various forms of diffusion or the types of diffusion. So again, depending upon the type of diffusion, if there is only contagious diffusion at work, what will happen? The diffusion process will be very slow. ठीक है. However, this contagious diffusion can be combined with the other three forms of diffusion, and in that case what will happen? The diffusion can become faster. ठीक है. So that is the phenomena of cultural diffusion. However, as we said, अभी हमने जैसे बोला कि cultural diffusion, if you look into, it is never uniform in space. ठीक है. So what are the reasons? The reasons are very simple. If you talk about the case of cultural diffusion, क्या हो रहा है? इसी से करता हूँ. Okay, so if you look into the case of cultural diffusion, there are several barriers. several barriers to the diffusion process or phenomena. These barriers, if you talk about, are of two types. There can be physical barriers to diffusion. So think, there are several type of physical barriers. Like for example, think, can we say one type of physical barrier has been oceans? ठीक है, so oceans कैसे होते हैं? They are very large and deep. So it is difficult to cross them. So it is difficult to cross them. And what they would do thus? Can we say thus they would restrict interaction? They would restrict interaction. Okay. So you can very clearly understand thus ocean behaves as a very effective barrier to diffusion process. And tell me, can we say it is manifested, the impact of oceans on the diffusion process is manifested that if we look into the cultural regions of the world, mostly the cultural regions coincide with the continents. Okay. So it is manifested in cultural regions of the world. Coinciding with continents. Okay. So this is one type of physical barrier. Another very common physical barrier is the mountains. So tell me, can we say mountains, particularly the large mountains like the Himalayas or the young fold mountains, they also restrict mobility in space? So लिख लो इसको, mountains, comma, particularly young fold mountains like Himalayas comma, can restrict mobility in space. And thus can be barriers to diffusion. Barriers to diffusion. Can we give the example of, number of examples can be given? Like for example, अगर हम यूरोप में देखें तो there is Alps mountains. So there is north of this, there is the European, West European culture. South of it, there is Mediterranean cultures. Similarly, if you look into the case of India and China, can we say Himalayas are behaving as such barriers? So south of Himalayas there is Indic culture and north of Himalayas there is Chinese culture. Indic culture and the Chinese culture. So mountains, if you talk about, is one of the major barrier to diffusion process. Then there can be others like deserts. So deserts are characterized, deserts are characterized by harsh climatic conditions due to which they are difficult to cross. As a result, they restrict mobility. Can we give example of North African culture? and the sub-Saharan African culture. So very good example is the barrier of Sahara desert. So deserts can be a barrier. Then other things like sometimes rivers can form as a barrier. So rivers, particularly large rivers can form as a barrier to diffusion. So stop. This is very evident in the Amazonian region. Where two different tribal cultures can exist on two opposite banks of the river. ठीक है. So these are barriers to diffusion, and one of the most universal barrier to diffusion जो अभी हमने बात किया था, it is distance. ठीक है. So distance is the most universal barrier to diffusion. It is the most universal barrier to diffusion process. Full stop. It exerts a frictional impact. And reduces diffusion phenomena. ठीक है. So there are physical barriers, then there can be human barriers. Human barriers to diffusion. So ह्यूमन बैरियर्स में बहुत सारे तरह के कल्चरल इकोनॉमिक बैरियर्स हो सकते हैं. लाइक फॉर एग्जांपल, वन इंपॉर्टेंट बैरियर अगर हम हिस्टोरिकली देखें तो वन इंपॉर्टेंट बैरियर कैन बी रिलीजन. ठीक है. सो फॉर एग्जांपल, इन रीसेंट टाइम्स टेल मी, डज द रिलीजन ऑल्सो इन्फ्लुएंसेस द पैटर्न ऑफ माइग्रेशन. ठीक है. अभी अगर हम देखें तो देर आर सर्टेन रिलीजन्स विच आर एसोसिएटेड विथ रिलीजियस फंडामेंटलिज्म. ठीक है. सो कैन वी से मेनी कंट्रीज आर रिस्ट्रिक्टिंग द नंबर ऑफ पीपल ऑफ दैट पर्टिकुलर ग्रुप ऑफ रिलीजन विल बी माइग्रेटिंग into the country. ठीक है. So religion is ultimately what? It is a very important feeling of oneness that people have or a group have, and it differentiates one group or one culture from the other, and thus it can form a very, very significant or formidable barrier between diffusion of cultures. ठीक है. So you can understand कि for example, एक छोटा सा एग्जाम्पल लो, देर आर मेनी फॉर्म्स ऑफ कल्चर्स. लाइक अगर हम देखें तो आज की मॉडर्न सोसाइटी में एक कल्चर है, एंड दिस वन कल्चर इज बर्थ कंट्रोल. इट हैज ग्रोन इन द मॉडर्न सोसाइटी, बट स्टिल वी फाइंड दैट देर आर एरियाज वेयर देर इज स्टिल वेरी हाई फर्टिलिटी रेट. लाइक फॉर एग्जाम्पल द इस्लामिक रियाम, अगर वहां पर देखें तो जो TFR है, इट इज स्टिल ओवर 4 देयर. And one of the reasons is the factor of religion. It doesn't allow such birth control cultures to become prominent. ठीक है. So religion, if you talk about, is also what? It is a one very dominant barrier to diffusion. ठीक है. So लिख लो, religion strongly affects cultures. And thus can form barrier between two different religions. ठीक है, दोनों एग्जाम्पल दिए थे, एक माइग्रेशन रिस्ट्रिक्शन ऑन द बेसिस ऑफ रिलीजन एंड द सेकेंड वन इज इवन द कल्चरल आइडियाज फ्लो विल बी लिमिटेड. Second very important human barrier is what? Language. So can we say language is the medium through which culture spread? So लिख लो, language is the medium through which the culture spread and find expression. Thus presence of different language can behave as an important barrier to cultural diffusion. ठीक है, लैंग्वेज बैरियर को कभी कभी हम सिमेंटिक बैरियर भी बोलते हैं. ठीक है, सो इवन इफ द क्वेश्चन इज अबाउट सिमेंटिक बैरियर, इट इज एसेंशियली लैंग्वेज बैरियर. तो बहुत सारे एग्जाम्पल्स हैं. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, बीइंग एन इंडियन, सपोज तुम्हें चॉइस दिया जाए टू माइग्रेट टू यूएस और चाइना. विल प्रेफर यूएस because English is spoken in United States. It will be difficult for us to ultimately become familiar or comfortable in China because of the language issue. For example, you will find Latin America से जो बहुत migration होता है वो कहाँ पर होता है? Latin speaking countries, particularly Spanish and Portuguese. ठीक है, so you can understand कि day before yesterday there was El Clasico football match between two of the biggest clubs of Spain, बार्सिलोना एंड रियल मैड्रिड. अनफॉर्चुनेटली मेरी टीम बार्सिलोना हार गई, ऑल्दो वी प्लेड वेरी वेल. बट कैन यू अंडरस्टैंड वन ऑफ द रीजंस व्हाई these clubs are very big? Because of their attraction related with the language, particularly with respect to the Latin American talent. Latin America, you can understand, वहाँ पर football is like a religion. ठीक है, so there lots of talented footballers come across, and most of these, if you talk about, are attracted to these clubs particularly the language. ठीक है, और यहाँ से जो बहुत ज़्यादा माइग्रेशन होता है वो स्पेन एंड पोर्तुगल की तरफ होता है. तो लैंग्वेज, इफ यू टॉक अबाउट, कैन प्ले अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट रोल. देन इफ यू टॉक अबाउट थर्ड इंपॉर्टेंट टाइप ऑफ बैरियर कैन बी इकोनॉमिक status. Economic status. So tell me, can we say rich people like ये तुम्हारे माल्या, चौकसी, मोदी, वो वाले, मोदी जी की बात नहीं कर रहा हूँ, वो मोदी जी हैं. ठीक है, तो नीरव मोदी, ललित मोदी, एटसेट्रा एटसेट्रा. Can you understand? They are very rich people. So rich people are a kind of global citizen. क्योंकि rich people का culture everywhere it is same. So they can go anywhere and they can essentially adjust. ठीक है? But can we say for a person who is poor, migration particularly can be a very, very difficult task for that particular person. He might not have the resources. Even if he has the resources, he might not be able to survive in a given condition. ठीक है, so economic status also very much determines the case of diffusion, particularly migration diffusion. तो लिख लो इसको, economic status particularly of the migrants determines the success or failure of the migration diffusion. Full stop. In general, rich people have better adaptability ठीक है। देन अदर ह्यूमन बैरियर्स की बात करें, फोर्थ क्या हो सकता है? कैन वी से वॉर्स एंड कन्फ्लिक्ट्स, wars and conflicts. So wars and conflicts can strain the relationships between two given regions, can strain the relationship between two given regions and create artificial barriers, in the flow of people and cultures. ठीक है, यू माइट हैव सीन कि इंडिया और पाकिस्तान में जब रिलेशनशिप स्ट्रेन हो जाते हैं बिकॉज ऑफ मेनी रीजंस, ठीक है, फर्स्ट थिंग अगर हम बात करें तो इंडियंस वुड से कि हम तुम्हारे साथ क्रिकेट नहीं खेलेंगे, एंड इफ यू टॉक अबाउट पाकिस्तानीज वुड से विल नॉट अलाउ द मूवीज ऑफ बॉलीवुड टू बी प्लेड हियर इन पाकिस्तान. So can we say all these are the various mechanisms through which the cultural diffusion is essentially taking place? ठीक है, so that is another form of barrier which can be there. So there are various socio-economic barriers which can also restrict the mobility, which can also restrict the diffusion of cultures. ठीक है, so this is the main theory जिसको हम पूरे cultural geography में use करने वाले हैं. And we will see that how it explains the pattern of distribution of various cultures. ठीक है, so we'll stop for today. We'll continue this tomorrow. And as you have seen, there is a lot in cultural geography which needs to be studied. ठीक है, so इसी बात पे फिर से याद दिलाता हूं कि लाइक बनता है आज की क्लास के बाद. And we'll continue this. And we'll complete all the topics which we talked about. Okay, goodbye, take care.